the forbidden blender.
"Do you recognize her?" the woman said, leaning down to the girl's level. "It's me," the girl said. "Yes, it is. What is she doing?" All of a sudden, the figure started to move. The figure of the girl with the blue ribbon shoved one of the other children to the ground and skated away quickly. "Now what was that all about?" the woman asked the girl. The little girl grabbed her head. She tried remembering, but it was fuzzy. He made fun of my skates, and I pushed him down." The woman didn't reply, but simply pulled down a snow globe from a high shelf and brought it down to the little girl's face. "And what about this?" This globe was alive with activity, people running to and fro. It was a large shopping mall. Wreaths and twinkling lights hung on display. Amidst the hustle and bustle, a young woman stood near a large display of designer purses. She cast furtive glances in a few directions, unzipped her large winter coat, and slipped one of the purses into the pocket of her jacket. She turned and walked away towards the exit, the blue ribbon in her hair flapping behind her. "Wait, how?" The little girl felt dizzy. I didn't have the money. I wanted it." The woman's grip on the little girl's hand grew tighter. Gazing up, the girl saw that the warm smile on the woman's face was gone. In the woman's hand was a new snow globe. The woman pressed it against the girl's face. "And what about this?" Despite her reluctance, the girl gazed into the orb. A man with his shirt off leaned back in recently tousled bedsheets. He admired the view of the woman zipping up her dress beside him. She answered a call on her cell. She told her husband she'd be back soon. The meeting had run much later than expected. The little girl's head was close to splitting at this point. We've been growing apart for years. Jeff was just confirmation that..." The words died in her mouth as she looked up to face the woman. But what had a hold of the girl's hand wasn't the woman. It wasn't even human. Dark, sunken holes riddled the charred shape. They opened and closed, pulsing discordantly. Its body was supported by 3 vicious-looking blades that looked to be shoved solidly into its flesh, blood trickling out slowly. It gripped the girl with a 3-digit strip of smoldering skin. In asymmetrical spider-like movement, the drained-looking creatures skittered slowly across the small chamber they were in. The sounds of the blades upon the marble floor and the little girl's frantic, desperate screams echoed. The warped voice of the woman spoke.
"I told you how much I love looking at my trinkets. I have much more to show you. Decades more."
The little girl dug her heels into the ground, but the sheer force of the creature's dragging could not be denied. The creature suddenly stopped and roughly lifted the small girl high above its drooping, bulbous head. The marble below the little girl's flailing feet opened up. Cold like she had never felt, rose from the cratered marble. The little girl clawed and bit at the hand restraining her, but it stood fast, dangling her over the growing, freezing hole. It released its grip, As the girl fell, she heard something. And suddenly, she was standing firmly on the ground near the entrance to the chamber. She looked around and turned her head into the left pants leg of a pair of jeans. She looked up to see the tall man with the pin. "You having fun?" he inquired. She shook her head no, decisively. "Yeah, I didn't think you would. Some things you gotta figure out on your own."
"You have something of mine, Mike,"
the twisted voice of the woman spoke at the other end of the chamber. "Well, that depends." He looked down at the small girl. "You gonna keep fucking up?" The little girl shook her head no. He kneeled down, staring into the frightened child's eyes with an unfiltered forcefulness. "You sorry?" The little girl nodded. He maintained his gaze, unblinking, for a full 10 seconds. Then he raised his head to the creature, but it was gone. Just a stunningly beautiful woman in a bright blue dress, who now stood inches away from the girl. "I think we're done here," he said, standing up. The woman took a step forward. "I think I'm entitled to just a little more time with—" She went silent as a small incision appeared on her flawless porcelain cheek. She put her hand up to cover it. "I just want—" Suddenly, 4 of the fingers on her raised hand sloughed off, the stumps smoking as the wounds instantly cauterized. She took another step forward. "Give—" Her left eye burned away, leaving that side of her face to slump.
"Give her to me,"
she screamed as she lunged forward. The man extended his arm. In that split second, the man and his jeans and his flannel and his shiny shoes disappeared. In their place was a mass of flesh covered in eyes. Countless goat eyes, compound eyes, snake eyes, all actively looking in every possible direction. Out of its back, jutting at horrifyingly impossible angles, were bat wings, dragonfly wings, and what looked like the impotent wings of a penguin. Multiple arms hung out of its chest. Several of those arms grabbed hold of the creature reaching for the girl, and quickly, precisely, tore it in half. As the bisected woman flailed on the ground, her charred, foul-smelling insides spilling out onto the floor, the man looked up at the wide-eyed little girl. "Hurry up. We can't miss our stop." And with that, he took her hand and led her up the stairs, leaving the woman to shriek uselessly on the ground, swimming in her fluids. The little girl and the man spoke as they ascended the stairs. He asked her about her life. She spoke hesitantly, very little at first. Then, with some coaxing, she told him everything she could remember. How hard she worked at ice skating, how difficult it was to move away from all her friends. She was taller now. How much she hated high school. How she would leave that town and never come back. She wore very large hoop earrings. How difficult it was making friends on the East Coast. She wore a very sensible business blouse. How much she loved her boyfriend. How many kids she wanted to have. Stress lines appeared on her middle-aged brow. How her and her husband didn't have the spark they once had. Small gold earrings. How hard it had been to reconcile after the affair. How hard it was to forgive herself after he'd forgiven her. More stress lines. how difficult it was to pay for 3 weddings in 10 years. She was shorter now, hunched. How much she missed her husband. How lonely it is without someone to talk to. The blue ribbon fell out of her hair and glided behind them. The man snatched it out of the air and tied it around her wrist. So you don't lose it. She told him how she couldn't pronounce what the doctors diagnosed her with, but it had spread everywhere. He carried her now. She was so light, almost as light as when she was a little girl. Where are we going, Mike? I've lost myself again. We're going to our stop, Rose. Her eyes were white now. She had trouble breathing. I'm scared, Mike. I've done things. They stood in front of the split door of the train car exit. I know, Rose. I think you're going to be all right. In that moment, she looked more like a scared child than ever before. But how do you know, Mike? Her dry, chapped lips trembled. How do you know? He looked down on her and smiled. I've got a feeling, Rose. I've just got a feeling. The doors opened. And by the way, Rose, strangers call me Mike. You can call me Michael. With her in his arms, they walked through the doors into warm light.